You need to find ways of connecting to the things that rejuvenate you, that give you back, that refill that motivation for why you chose to go into this. I think for many of you, I think that is kind of seeking justice, seeking healthcare access. Otherwise you wouldn't have given up what may be a lovely or at least restful Saturday to spend your time online with PHR. So I kind of applaud what all of you are doing, and I look forward to seeing you, working with you as healthcare colleagues in the future. And with that, I will leave you to your final PHR panel.
Dr. Hani, thank you so much for those words. It's inspiring to hear it from people that are established, because as a medical student, I think we all sometimes feel very like we're in transit, we're in limbo. We want to do these things, but we are still so early in our careers, and we have so much to learn. So it's just really inspiring to hear that from someone like you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
So Susanna, Michael, Kevin, I'm gonna leave it to you guys to decide if you want to give a break now and how you want to lead this session.
Well, I think it sounds like, yeah, hi everyone. I'm Michael Payne. I'm the interim advocacy director at Physicians for Human Rights. So it sounds like you all are just coming right off of another panel. So I think maybe a break would probably be nice for everyone. So it is now 4:02 Eastern, let's say, or 4:03 Eastern. Let's say 4:08, take 5 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and start. Does that work? Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. All right, we're at 10 after, so I think it's good to just get started. I know I can't quite see who all's back and who all's not, but I think we can all just sort of settle in here. I know that everyone's been having quite a long day today, and there's been a lot that everyone's been taking in and discussing here. So I'm happy to. I want this panel here to give you guys a bit of information about what PHR has been working on in the area of crowd control weapons and excessive use of force lately. But I'm hoping to not overwhelm everyone with just a bunch more information, and hopefully we can have a little bit more discussion. And so with this, I just want to start off with just a quick introductions for of our fellow panelists here. But I'm starting out. I'm Michael Payne. I'm the interim advocacy director at PHR. I'm based in Washington, D.C., where I represent PHR in our advocacy work in Congress, on the Hill, in our interaction with the federal government, and then more recently, and particularly too with this work, with state and local governments as well. Kevin Short and Rohini Haar are also on our panel. I'll let Kevin and Rohini introduce themselves briefly.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Short, Media Relations Manager at PHR. So I am tasked with developing and executing PHR's media strategies. And really, my main goal is to be able to support journalists to report on human rights and medical issues, and really spotlight PHR's research and advocacy campaigns through the news media and through our communications channels.
And I'm Rohini Haar. I'm based in Berkeley, California. I'm an ER doc by training, and I work here in Oakland, and I'm a medical advisor to PHR. I've been working with PHR for, I don't know, maybe since medical school or college myself. And right now I spend a lot of my time with PHR working on protests all over the world and on the use of crowd control weapons. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks. So we're just going to start out. I just to give a little bit of background. Physicians for Human Rights has been working on issues relating to crowd control weapons, looking at the what are often called less lethal or less than lethal weapons. But these weapons still have quite a strong and often deadly impact, a strong impact on health of protesters and people, and bystanders all around the world. And so PHR has been working on issues related to crowd control weapons in a number of countries, including among which is Bahrain, South Korea, Palestinian territories, and just a wide range of other countries over many years now. So, but this is sort of the first time that we've been taking that work that we've been doing around the world and bringing that focus to the United States, and seeing the impact of these weapons in the protests that erupted over the summer here in the U.S. Following the death of George Floyd, where we saw a lot of protests that were demanding justice and combating racism and white supremacy around the country. And so in a lot of different cities and states, we were seeing these weapons used to quite a dangerous effect. As I'm sure Rohini will be able to speak to a little bit more about the sort of impacts of these weapons. She's been one of our amazing experts that we've had who's done a lot of the research and work into looking at crowd control weapons. So I'm happy to sort of walk you all through a little bit of the work that we've been doing on crowd control weapons. I do also want to continue to sort of drop links in for everyone to see and to read along. But as you all may be aware, over the summer, when in one of the locations of where we saw these protests really erupt in a really sustained way, but also escalate to a new level where it wasn't just local police or state police that were being called in, but there were federal forces that were also sent into Portland, Oregon. And so with this escalation, PHR sent a team to Portland to do an investigation, to look at the protest there, to look at the use of force by these various forces from state, local, and federal levels. And also we were there looking at and documenting attacks on medics and medical personnel who were at these protests. And that our team identified instances where we were seeing what seemed like a not random sort of attacks that were being directed at medics and people arrested as well. But then also in terms of looking at the crowd control weapons that were being used in Portland, we saw a wide range of tear gas being used. We saw sort of rubber bullets and sponge bullets that were being fired. PHR has, we've put together a lot of different resources looking into the various health impacts of a lot of these different individual types of weapons. And sorry, I thought I had the link to pull up that had all of that to drop in there, but I'll follow up and to put this in the chat just briefly as well. But we've also, so in addition to going in and doing this work and really having a lot of connections with local organizations on the ground, interviewing medics on the ground in Portland, we also met with policymakers. We met with and talked to people from the Portland city government, from the county commissioner's office, and then also in Congress with their senators and other representatives, and really trying to try to get to the bottom of some of the different policies that we were seeing that were resulting in some of the bad practices that we were seeing on the ground in Portland. Because in addition to just the crowd control weapons parts, there were also issues too with having ambulance access and medical access to areas where protesters were gathering. And so this is sort of another sort of state and local level issue that we were digging into. We, together with a number of other organizations, were also sending letters to the federal government, to the Department of Homeland Security, really urging them, who are the overarching sort of the top level of seeing of responsibility for the federal level troops that were going into Portland. And so, we have these actions of trying to mobilize our network of PHR members, but also definitely including students within our network here. So I hope everyone is signed up to get our action alerts, to know what's going on, to be able to write to your senators, to write to your local representatives, to write into offices on the federal level, and put pressure on the government, and put pressure on a number of different positions all around the country and around the world, depending on our work here, which really does have an impact on how we're able to engage and really to try to push recommendations that come out of the work that we put together in these sorts of reports and investigations that we put forward. In addition to in Portland, another instance where we have been tracking here and doing a bit of an investigation too over the summer was into a particular instance of egregious policing that was happening in the Bronx in New York. I'm also pasting a link into an interactive piece that we published on targeted attacks in the Bronx. This was an instance of where we were also seeing medics in a protest setting who were arrested and separated or blocked from giving medical aid to protesters who were injured. We saw excessive use of force by the NYPD against the protests in the Bronx, as well as kettling to contain everyone in the protest areas. And thank you for sharing the link to sign up for our action alerts in the chat there for everyone. But so so following this investigation, which we published, our interactive piece that's looking at, particularly from the perspective of the medics that were in the protests there, But also we had partners from Human Rights Watch who also in parallel did their own investigation into some of the wider sort of legal issues as well. And together with Human Rights Watch, we've been engaging with members, policymakers in the city government and reaching out to the police about the instances that have been happening there, and really trying to press them for investigations and for accountability, and revising then the standards that they are utilizing in the NYPD for that allow for the types of instances that we documented at the Bronx protests. And so in terms of the recommendations that we, and so these pieces of research and reporting have really been invaluable, as well as the research that Rohini will talk about that's a little bit more systematic into each of these different pieces of our work on the different types of weapons and the dangers that they possess. We've also been doing a wide range of advocacy with states and local governments across the country who, in response to seeing a lot of these types of protests, go in a very dangerous direction, in response also to, in terms of the dangers of crowd control weapons, but also, seeing and trying to respond to the issues that the protests are driving, right, is addressing, police use of force across the country. And so a lot of states and a number of cities across the country have been passing new legislation to reform their police practices and their criminal justice systems in a number of ways. But crowd control weapons has been a key part to that, where and PHR has then been engaged with a number of cities and states across the country where we're trying to advise, city council members or state representatives on the dangers that we've documented and reported on with all of these various crowd control weapons, and then pushing for greater regulations, restrictions, accountability measures for tear gas and chemical irritants, for kinetic impact projectile weapons like rubber bullets and beanbag rounds, among other pieces of among other weapons. So with another piece that we had put out recently is an interactive piece that looks at a lot of different instances across the country too. This is the shot in the head piece, which Rohini took the lead on putting together that. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to tell you a little bit more about this other piece of PHR work.
Thanks, everyone. And let me start like this and say, oftentimes at the end of one of these conferences, students will always ask, well, what you can do, what can I do, how can I get involved? And I will actually start with that today and say that earlier this week, one of our colleagues who actually started a lot of the work on crowd control weapons that we've been doing at PHR for more than 5 years on this specific project was arrested and detained in Egypt while he was on vacation. His name is Karim Enara, and he and actually 3 other colleagues from the Egyptian, I think it's called EIPR, were arrested. So if you want to know what you can do, I would say you can tweet storm. PHR has already posted about this, and I would love for you to share information about Karim and his colleagues anywhere you can. I've been tweeting about it, so you can go to my Twitter, or you can go to PHR, of course. And it's already been, well published in the news, but he's still in jail, and Egypt is pretty repressive regime. Thank you, Susanna. So I'll start there and say it's a hard day for us to talk about crowd control weapons because while, I sit in Berkeley and write reports and stuff, this is very real for a lot of people all over the world. And I think it's just really important to keep ourselves grounded, especially when we think that one of my good friends and colleagues is just sitting in jail right now for doing the same work I'm doing here. So tweet it up. And then in the chat box, if are the students allowed to put chat questions in, Michael? Yes, right? How many of
I
you have
believe
been,
so.
how many of you have, thank you. How many of you have been to a protest this year or, since May? Have a lot of you been? Have a few of you? You can raise your hands, you can react, you can put it in the chat box if you had a crazy experience. And I think many, many of us have. I think it's been more people probably protesting now, they say sometimes, than in the past. And, for a long time when we were studying these weapons, we were thinking about basic freedoms that people have when they're protesting. So those would fall under freedom of speech or expression and freedom of assembly. So all of us in the United States, we call those constitutional rights under the First Amendment, but all over the world, those are still just called human rights. To speak out, to speak your mind, and to assemble with who you want. But in a lot of places, that is not allowed. Let me give you a few examples. So right now in Thailand, gatherings of greater than 5 people are banned because of the protest movement there. My family is a family of 6, so I don't know how that would work. In Palestine, gatherings of greater than 5 people have been banned for probably more than a decade. In South Africa, protests have to get permission. And oftentimes, if it's something that's anti-government, you can't actually get permission to protest. And these are all just a few of the small things that happen all over the world. Now, one thing that we study that's quite narrow, but really important, is how law enforcement can often use crowd control weapons like tear gas, rubber bullets, water cannons, what have you, to do 2 things. One is to disperse protests because they don't like them or whatever's happening in them. And 2, to have a chilling effect or to intimidate people who might want to protest or might want to be out there from doing so. So while I've been working internationally for quite some time, our most recent report, which Michael mentioned, is called Shot in the Head, a quite apt title. Let me just find the website. Discusses actually the use of crowd control weapons in the United States since the killing of George Floyd. And to narrow it down more, because there were so many uses of force and uses of crowd control weapons, we actually focused very specifically on the use of projectiles like rubber bullets, foam batons, sponge rounds, things like that. And we also only kept it focused to folks who were shot in the head, the face, or the neck, because there's so many injuries to the rest of the body as well. But the injuries to the head, face, and neck are quite dramatic and cause oftentimes permanent injury and disability. So you can take a look at the link that we just posted, but I'll just walk through and say, when we start a project like this, you always start with a question, right? What the question here was, well, how many injuries are there? Can we figure this out? And right now, PHR, like everybody else, is struggling under COVID. Travel is harder. Getting out in the streets and just interviewing people and getting together or joining conferences or meetings is harder. So what we decided to do was use the internet. We searched tweets, we searched Facebook, we searched all kinds of news media to identify how many people actually were hit in the head or face just in the past few months. And you can see that this is probably quite a conservative estimate, but we identified at least 115 people who had severe or significant injuries. Now, I won't go through every single one and I'll let you play with the site, but if you'd like, you can click on the city that you're in and find each incident, and it'll tell you, who the young man or young woman is, the person, the date, and what kind of injury. And then you could also find out where they got hurt and a link to what happened to them. And this is kind of a first of its kind report for PHR. A lot of folks don't do this kind of work and really can't do it in the medical world. And so it was quite powerful. Beyond identifying all these folks in these different cities that had these injuries, we also show a little bit about what these weapons are. And then we go down and we deep dove into 3 cities, Los Angeles, Portland, and Austin. And the question we had in these cities was not just how many people are hurt, but what are the policies in these different cities? Certainly there's very little regulation in the grand, like federal level or at the state level, but every police department has its own policies on use of force. And can we find those policies? And can we identify if police were actually following their policies or not? And as we did our research and identified exactly what happened, you can see we looked very closely at people with injuries. We geolocated where these people are when they were getting injured. We found videos and tweets of where police were firing from. Here you can see they're on top of a synagogue in Los Angeles. What we identified was that in each of these 3 cases that we took a deep look at, the police violated not only what I would argue is constitutional law about freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, but also violated their own policies on use of force and what they can target and what they can use and how. And so, while we can continue to advocate for international regulations and local regulations, what we can also do here is say, hey, in these cities, they didn't even follow their own laws. And that was quite powerful. I'm going to leave it there and let Kevin speak for a bit as well, and then I can jump back in afterwards.
Great. Thanks so much, Rohini. Really appreciate it. And hi again, everyone. Just want to say it's such a privilege and an honor to join you all here today. I think most folks out there recognize med students as the future doctors of America, future doctors of the world. But I and all of the PHR staff are really impressed by the work you're doing today as part of the public health and social justice movements, lending your time and energy and skills to PHR research, participating in the asylum network, and so much more. So just really on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. And I'm just going to attempt a screen share here, if you'll bear with me. Can folks see my screen? Is that looking good? Great. So in addition to conducting innovative research and doing strategic advocacy, as Rohini and Michael have so aptly described, PHR also leads strategic communications and media campaigns, really to just ensure that our evidence and our calls to action resonate widely, that they move public opinion, and that they really help and contribute to some of the changes in policy and practice that we want to see in the world. And I think PHR is really at its strongest, and it's really one of the greatest strengths of PHR when we are able to help to kind of inform and shift the public discourse on the issues that PHR works on, whether that's the need to ban landmines or to stop bombing hospitals, to end torture, to provide reparations to the families who endured the family separation policy, or as we've seen so vividly this year, the need to regulate crowd control weapons in the United States. And so I think that can be really, really impactful. And of course, the core of that, of course, is the research itself. It's the investigations. But we find that strategic communications and media can really fuel those efforts. Partnering with really talented journalists, telling stories on PHR's own platforms, mobilizing our base of supporters of health professionals and their allies can really help to contribute to positive change. And just a quick word on this photo that I have up. This depicts an effort from earlier this year when folks at PHR and other health and human rights activists partnered with the brilliant filmmakers and doctors behind the Oscar-nominated documentary For Sama, which is just tremendously brilliant film, really a gripping depiction of the of attacks on healthcare in Syria, and also just the courage and the resiliency of doctors on the ground there and other activists. So this was outside of the United Nations headquarters earlier this year, in the midst of a really deadly escalation in Idlib province. And it was kind of a moment to try to redirect media attention and kind of shape media narratives around these issues. And so, yeah, if you have not seen For Sama, please run, don't walk to your nearest PBS station. I think it's on Amazon or perhaps Netflix as well. But just a nice example of partnership for media impact. So I just want to take a quick step back and ask why do we do this at all? Why do we do media relations and strategic communication? Some of this is a bit more obvious, but I think others, can be a bit more nuanced. And of course, we do want to spotlight PHR's research and advocacy. Publishing is important, but we want to be able to go beyond just publishing an academic journal or writing a letter to a congressperson. We really want to increase public awareness. A lot of the issues that PHR works on aren't necessarily the kind of household, like dinner table topics that most folks think about. We want to shift narratives, and really, I think we want to, in many cases, bust myths and counter disinformation. I think this is particularly true with the crowd control weapons work that we've seen, and Rohini knows this better, arguably, than anyone else in the world. But there's so many myths and misconceptions around these weapons. Oh, they're just rubber. They're just bean bags. They're just sponge. They're so benign. They won't do anything. They just scare folks off. But really, that the data, the evidence shows that that's not true at all. But if we want to be able to make sure that folks around the country, around the world know that, it's not enough just to publish something in the British Medical Journal or something like that. We really need to be out there proactively busting myths and educating folks using our evidence, but really kind of reaching people where they are. I don't think most folks out there don't go, read the Lancet before they go to sleep every night, but they might be watching TV news. They might be scrolling through Instagram. So really our job on the communications department at PHR is to try to reach people where they are. And so also, this media work really helps to pressure elected and appointed officials and law enforcement. That's been a critical part of our work this year, be it on the Portland Police Bureau, the DHS and DOJ, various UN agencies. We find that, they do, well, not always, but at times they'll respond to pressure, and media attention and scrutiny is an important part of building that pressure. Also with media and communications, we find that it helps to mobilize our health professionals in the PHR network, helps to inspire them to kind of broaden the coalition of folks working, acting, researching, and speaking out for human rights. On breaking the news and shaping the news, what I mean by that is that, there are times when PHR has a totally novel study or report, and we are essentially the news. We publish a report saying 115 people suffered head and neck injuries due to kinetic impact projectiles during the George Floyd protests. And so sometimes, we create the news story, but in other times, the reporting is going to happen no matter what. And part of our job is to shape the coverage that's going to take place. Like with Portland, with the protest there, it was inevitable that the local, national, and international media was going to descend on there. It was a bit of a, hectic environment, a bit spectacular there. And, stories are going to be written, but are they going to include a medical and a human rights lens or not? And we would like them to. We think their coverage will be better rounded, more comprehensive, more eye-opening, more sensitive and rights-respecting if our team does that work. So I think a lot of times we see reporting on health, on human rights and humanitarian issues, and PHR, we want to add a medical lens to that journalism. We want to add a kind of scientific evidence-based lens to that journalism. And then in other times, there's medical and health reporting, and we want those reporters to adopt more of a human rights and social justice point of view. So it's both about creating the news and about shaping it. And lastly, I'll just say, we're really at every turn looking to amplify medical voices, and get more doctors out there in front of the press. Rohini has been an absolute star in that regard, just so incredible, and really, not just sitting back and publishing a study and saying my job is done here, but taking that research to the press, to the public, speaking out, being receptive. That's all really great. And, I think it's obviously been a really difficult year for this, but I do believe that when doctors and health professionals speak out, people listen, journalists listen. Obviously with COVID and the insane amount of disinformation and direct affronts to healthcare workers this year, that concept is under stress. But I do truly believe that doctors are very credible and authoritative voices in the news media, both for journalists and for their audiences. And we find that we can really enhance coverage by getting doctors speaking out. And lastly, it's important for PHR's brand, our visibility, our ability to fundraise, our ability to be sustained as an organization. So these are just some building blocks, and this is how our team thinks about building successful communication strategies, whether it comes to an individual report or our work from year to year. And it looks different in each instance, but these are some kind of core commonalities from determining our goals. And I'll say, a lot of times people think, okay, the goal is to get an article in the New York Times or to be on CNN, but that's really just a tactic. That's a means to an end. Like just getting in the media for PR purposes is not enough when it comes to human rights work. So the goal is to have the city of Philadelphia ban rubber bullets for crowd control weapons. The goal is to have the UN Security Council adopt a certain resolution, and media is just kind of a vehicle and one of the tools in the toolkit to get there. We want to identify our target audiences, be that policymakers, aid organizations, donors, et cetera. We're often looking to identify, who are the spokespeople, who can speak out, whose voices are most needed in these conversations. And that, of course, is PHR staff. It's the experts, the folks like Dr. Haar, the talking heads, but it's also, other people with interesting perspectives, with lived experiences, folks who are affected by the human rights violations that PHR works on. We have our tactics, and then lastly, a key part of, I think, all of our work, but particularly within communications, is we want to always take a step back and say what's working, what's not, how do we need to adjust, how do we measure and monitor our success. So as far as tactics go, really, at the core of so many tactics and communications is just crafting a powerful message. And this sounds simple, but it's really a lot easier said than done. And, really it's really at the core of all communications efforts, whether you're writing an op-ed, you're speaking at a press conference, you're giving a speech, you're any kind of public communications. If you don't have a kind of core resonant message that you can articulate, your audience is really going to be lost. So, when I do media trainings or talk to folks, kind of counsel them through writing an op-ed, doing something public, the most resonant question is always like, what is your key message? Like, just write down in advance your top 3 key messages and make sure in the interview that you deliver and execute those. And we find that, really often the most powerful messages are ones that can fuse together data and evidence, the head, the substance, but it's not just clinical, it's not just scientific. You do need to weave in human stories. That's what, I think a lot of psychology research shows that, people really change their opinions and their beliefs more based on stories than on data and evidence. But as physicians for human rights, we need to combine all of those along with an ask of what can folks actually do? What's our call to action? What policy or practice needs to be changed? So just diving into some of these tactics a bit more, just to give folks a flavor of some of the things that our department at PHR does in partnership with every other part of the organization and with experts and health professionals around the world, is we like to pitch our research and reports to journalists using embargoes. So that means, if we have a study that's going to publish on December 1st, we get a final copy of that, and we basically share it with trusted, skilled veteran reporters who report on that issue a week, 2 weeks in advance. And we find that that's a really effective tool in helping, the moment that we publish a study at PHR, if we at the same time have several news articles publishing at the exact same moment, there's kind of a, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It can really help to drive attention and drive the narrative if we're able to secure coverage of PHR research. A lot of our work is, partnering with journalists. Like I really believe that I and our team has a responsibility to help journalists do their job, help them tell the most complete and interesting and rights-driven stories about the issues that we work on. We're constantly responding to breaking news. We're issuing quick quotes. We're writing op-eds in response to the news, writing press releases, responding to floods of media inquiries on the various issues that we work on, and things like that. And yeah, continuing to amplify medical voices. And I'll just close here by saying that, 10, maybe 15 years ago, you really had to use the news media if you wanted to get your story, your issue, your research out into the world. That was really kind of one of your only options. But now with social media and with our own web presence, PHR is able to really be its own publisher, and we can tell our own stories. Yes, we want the news media to report on the things we care about, to pick up the messages and the calls to action that we have as an organization. But also, we're empowered as our own publisher. We can create our own multimedia elements and videos. We can write our own commentaries. We can kind of tell the story the way we want to as well. And lastly, just on persisting, I just want to acknowledge that, of course, and in human rights work, there are no instant or fast victories. This work is a slog. It's long. Yes, we can get some nice immediate press coverage, but the work really, really continues. And I think on the crowd control weapons front, we've seen that a lot with a flagship report that Dr. Haar and colleagues wrote now back in 2016, 2017, called "Lethal in Disguise," which really was a seminal work documenting the health and human rights impacts of crowd controlled weapons around the world. Sadly, that report is now cited in the news media all the time with the really wanton and excessive acts of force that we've seen in the US during this last year. So lastly, a key adage in communications is to show, don't tell. And I've done a lot of telling at this very late hour of the day, and I'm sure everyone is really exhausted. But I just thought I would show a couple examples of what this looks like in practice, kind of going beyond the theoretical here. And right here, this image depicts the team of investigators that were deployed to Portland, Oregon this summer. And it was an interesting opportunity because we realized that the New York Times famous columnist Nick Kristof, depicted here, was in Portland. And so, we understood that, we can publish our own research, but if we can have Dr. Nick Kristof kind of telling, exposing some of the issues that we were working on, it would go a really long way. So PHR kind of served as a middleman in basically connecting Nick Kristof to the volunteer street medics and health professionals who were tending to injured protesters and injured medics during the unrest. And he ultimately kind of incorporated bits about volunteer medics in a piece that kind of countered some of the disinformation that was coming from the White House and the far right media. And are folks able to see the CBS screen? I just changed slide. So let me I'm just switching to one moment here. So I'm just going to share a couple other examples of kind of what strategic communications in practice looks like. Can folks see this CBS slide here? So, you know, a lot of the media really started to pay attention to the impacts of less than lethal weapons this summer, and there were so many anecdotal reports, things going on in each city. But I think the Shot in the Head report really did a tremendous public service by really illustrating the scale and the scope of these injuries. It's not isolated incidents. It's not just Portland and LA. It's not just blue states. Really, there are these sorts of acts of excessive force are happening all over the country. So we worked very hard to try to make sure that PHR's evidence and also just our perspectives on these weapons were incorporated in a lot of news media. So here's one example. This is on CBS Sunday Morning. It's one of the top Sunday morning kind of news programs in the US. And I hope that folks will be able to hear the audio. I'll give it my best shot here. Sorry, and I'm just going to say, I don't have time to show the whole thing. I'm just going to show about a 1 or 2 minute clip here, and I can share these clips in the chat if folks want to check out the whole thing.
Hi, is everybody able to hear?
Kev, you could share the audio separately, I think.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll skip that, but sorry the audio isn't coming through. I'll share it.
You can send me the link. I can pull it up and check the option for sharing audio if you'd like.
Feel free to just drop it in the chat, and we started getting used to it earlier in the day with the video.
Okay. Sure thing. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah, so I'll just, if folks are able to pull that up, great. If not, no worries. Folks can look at it a little bit later. But I'll just say that later in that clip, you know, it tells the stories of folks who endured traumatic brain injuries, partial blindings, fractured jaws, et cetera, from rubber bullets, and then features Dr. Haar kind of offering some commentary on that. And I think, you know, the voice of a physician is really powerful in that instance. Of course, you know, the folks who, if you want to go to,
it's been a summer of unrest.
140 mark.
140.
In a number of beanbag ground. The crowd dispersed, including, that's her wearing a pink backpack. But watch what happens
Or actually,
next.
excuse me, if you could go to the 250. Thanks, sorry about that.
No problem.
Where the protesters are gathered in a group and police are gathered in their line, and the people who are in between in that space are going to be media. And that's how you get that understanding of what's going on, is you stand and you watch both sides.
That's what she was doing in Minneapolis that night. This is the last photo she took, what appears to show an officer aiming directly at her.
I think that not shooting people in the face for exercising the first thing we fixed about the Constitution should just be standard operating procedure.
The non-lethal round shot at Linda that night blinded her in her left eye.
So I can see to about here. And everything from here to here is just blank. I'm assured that as I become used to having one eye, I'll be able to do all the things I used to do without it being a problem. But like the getting used to only having one eye not a small task.
To be sure, police have been injured in the protests too. Hundreds of them. More than 50 on one particularly violent night in Seattle recently. Crowds can be dangerous. Dispersing them is often necessary. But the research on the lethality of less lethal weapons is pretty hard to come by. In 2017, a review of the available literature on the subject was published in the medical journal BMJ Open. Of the nearly 2,000 people since 1990 documented to have been injured by less lethal rounds, 300 suffered permanent disability. 53 of them died.
These are large, dense, high-speed projectiles, and they cause significant and severe injuries.
Dr. Rohini Haar is with Physicians for Human Rights and one of the authors of that review.
The basic rights, like free speech and free assembly, are being suppressed globally, and the primary way that that's happening is because of crowd control weapons.
In just the first week after the death of George Floyd, Haar documented at least 100 serious injuries to protesters and journalists, most to the head and neck.
The narrative is that they're not lethal, they're not dangerous, that police need a continuum of use of force, and that these are really excellent options for them to be safe while at the same time.
Thanks so much, and sorry for those technical difficulties there. Yeah, I just want to say, it's one thing to hear, and it's so important to hear survivors' story in news coverage, but I think it's complemented really nicely by the physician's perspective and by someone who has dedicated so many years to this type of work. And yeah, just to go back on screen share, and I'll just, one moment here. Can folks can see that? Great. Yeah, so just to say, we're doing a lot of work to try to make sure that this research and evidence gets out into the news media, and not just to audiences that we think would already agree and align with PHR research and perspectives, but also to more middle of the road, quote unquote, moderate news audiences as well. This is an example of a USA Today report on the shot in the head visual investigation that we've been talking about here. And, we've also been doing a fair amount of work with local media as well. That's important. It's easy to, get distracted just by the national and international opportunities, but, making sure that we're speaking to local news consumers as well is super important. Michael referenced some of our e-actions. This is just a quick example of one of them. Really nice that when we publish something, it's accompanied by a concrete, tangible thing that people can do. So you can see here, the message, and you can add your name to that. I do just want to show one additional video, kind of to the theme of telling our own story, not just waiting for the news media to cover an issue, but also going out there and putting out our own perspective. I think this is a good example of that in conjunction with the Portland report that PHR published. So I'm just going to share this in the chat again, and Sebastian or others, if you wouldn't mind playing this.
We've been on the ground here in Portland, Oregon to document and investigate the horrific injuries and violence perpetrated by federal agents on peaceful protesters and volunteer medics. What we're seeing is shocking. It's appalling.
de-escalate.
Great. Thank you so much. And hopefully that was effective as report promotion. I just, of course, we want folks to read the entire 40-page PDF that we publish, and many do, and that's absolutely vital. But not everyone's going to do that. So kind of repackaging the insights from a report like that, putting it in a multimedia element, something that's immersive and interesting, putting it out on social. I mean, I don't have the statistics on hand, but many more folks will consume that type of content on PHR social media channels or through news and media coverage, then will read the full report. We want both, but yeah, so I think I'll leave it there. A few other examples, and I just want to close by saying that I would love to stay in touch with anyone on this line. Feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions at all about communications or media at PHR. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kevin. So I know that we got about a half hour left here, and so we wanted to open this up to questions and further discussion about really anything that we've been covering here, covering crowd control weapons, less lethal weapons, excessive use of force, or if we can speak to anything either on just advocacy or on communications issues at all. So happy to either take questions if people want to just hop in, come off of mute and ask a question, or we can put questions in the chat, and we're happy to respond at all.
While we're waiting for questions, hi everybody, Susanna here again. I said goodbye, but I'm back. Can't get enough of this. But just to note that when PHR puts out this stuff and you're in medical school and you're busy, amplifying all of these on your social platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, is really a huge help. And as are taking action from wherever you're located, and especially because you students are all over the country. We found out, we had a meeting with a senator this past week who requested a meeting with PHR, a US senator from Ohio, who requested a meeting with PHR because every week his staff counts the emails and letters and messages that he gets from his constituents in his state. And that particular week, because of a PHR action, the most letters he got had to do with our protest of the potential US withdrawal from the World Health Organization. So based on that, he requested a meeting. And, we were just sort of, I have to say, after all these years, we're still flabbergasted when we hear that. And we brought a bunch of doctors to the meeting with him from Ohio. We've done the same with medical students, by the way. And so, you really do, in the morning, Alan Jones said to you all, you have a superpower that's really special that we don't have. And, you can use it even now while you're students.
And to that point too, I did want to also say, when you take action with one of our action alerts, or when you're writing in or you're calling in to, either your member of Congress, to local city government, to all of these other folks, this really does have an impact. And so I wanted to bring that around again, just in terms of the what can you do. By all means, like if there's other issues that you want to write on and there's PHR, we're happy to have a lot of resources out there to be able to to show evidence or to have recommendations that you can take and run with. And if you want to write your own letters, like, go for it. But knowing that you're medical students and you have so many other things going on, when we do these action alerts, and you can basically, fill in your name and, your zip code, and it'll, send it to your members of Congress for you. And you can take action. As Susanna mentioned, this does happen where, these members do track their mail that they're getting. And I know for a fact, and I can say for certain that, this member of this senator was not the only one who does this. All members of Congress essentially will be keeping a close eye on the mail that they receive, the emails that they receive, the calls that they receive. They track this very closely. And even when they're thinking about sort of taking the pulse of, their constituents that they're representing in Congress, they give weight to, letters and calls and all of that, because they think, all right, well, if I'm going to get a letter about this, someone took the time to write to my office about this issue, I assume that there's got to be at least 10 other people for every letter that for someone that's going to take the time to write a letter. So when they're starting to get, 50, 100, 200 letters coming into their office, then, like, to them, that has an outsized impact of how many people must be in their district or in their state that really cares about this issue too. So even taking just a few moments to join an action alert, it can really have an impact on like the advocacy work we're doing with policymakers to get the laws changed, to get the policies changed, to demand accountability for human rights violations that we're covering. And I'll say that that is even to a stronger extent felt on a local level. When you're engaging with your local representatives, if you're engaging with state level government, just because I think when people think of I want to talk about an issue, I'll write to my congressperson. They're used to getting quite a bit of mail, but they do really care and they really track it. But city council members don't get a lot of mail about issues that they're doing, or state representatives don't get a lot of mail about what they're doing. So just keeping all of that in mind. And when we're talking about issues here of policing and crowd control, a lot of these issues are state issues, they're local issues. And so, PHR, we continue to track, these new developments in cities and states across the country. But another thing you can do too is, like, as you hear about anything too, if you want to send us information that you see in your local community of my city, my state is considering new legislation on this, and I want to write something about it. You can connect to PHR, and we're trying to track everything, but we don't see everything. And so if we have resources that we can put in and we can share. And I'm actually also going to paste in the chat here the primer that we have on crowd control weapons too. That's a good sort of reference guide for if ever you wanting to talk about in sort of a quick reference form the work or the information around crowd control weapons, or have recommendations at hand. This is a good spot here too. So I think we've got some stuff in the chat.
Yeah, I can answer the actually, I think Tom Griffiths asked a question about, does PHR have resistance or open opposition from other health professional and medical voices? I haven't seen anything organized in that way. I've certainly gotten a lot of emails from people who find me on the web and have disagreed with what we've said, and some resistance from police officers who've contacted me as well, but nothing specific or organized. And I think part of that is because we're not just doing advocacy. Like, a lot of what the work we're doing is like fairly academic level research. And so, as Kevin shared with you on the video, not only do we publish the PHR reports, but we also use the data to publish peer-reviewed scholarly literature about this. And that really strengthens the credibility and the legitimacy of a lot of the work, because it's in academic journals. Some people don't even want to cite, some people want to cite the academic journal paper and not the PHR report, or vice versa. And they both together are really working well for a lot of the work that I'm doing. And then actually, this is interesting. A student asked, we've been told as medical students to avoid going to protests and to avoid getting into trouble. I've probably heard the same thing from my mother many times. But I would say that thankfully, at least in the United States, by and large, we still have rule of law. I would always advise people to protect themselves and to definitely don't throw water bottles or get violent or be anywhere near violence. But rather it's still critically important for that those of us who believe in this stuff and are willing to do it, go out there and do protest safely and with masks and all of that stuff as well. If you were in Egypt, I would probably have different advice for you. But I will say that one of the folks that really got me inspired was the chairman of my emergency department at Bellevue Hospital. And he was actually kicked out of Johns Hopkins Medical School in, I want to say the 60s, for protesting the fact that Black students were not allowed in that school. And you know what? He landed on his feet. He's the chairman of Bellevue's emergency department for 40 years. And I would argue that while you shouldn't do anything that puts you at risk, standing up for what you believe will always land you on the right side of history.
I would also like to clarify that when we're talking about the street medics, including some of those shown in the video that Kevin showed, they are not participating in the protests. They are, in that context, keeping their, sort of neutral medical care position. They're standing on the side. They're wearing insignia on their hats, on their shirts, on their shoulders. And their job is to treat the injured and not to be partisan involved in the protest. At PHR, we put out this guide for people who do choose to protest. As an organization, we are not encouraging people not to or to protest. We are working to protect people's rights should they choose to be out there, and we are working to protect the role of responders, including the street medics, which is a very interesting phenomenon that has emerged. I mean, it's long-standing, but has grown a lot in this context. So you can learn more about that from some of the reports that we put out, as well as from the guide, just to be clear.
And to the last part of that question too, are there protections, extra protections for medical personnel in protests like that? This is actually an issue that we've identified that we'd like to be trying to work on and to help to create more formal protections for health workers who are doing that neutral work that is there for the protection of all. And so at this point, it is not firmly established that there are these protections for health workers or street medics in this sense, but this is something that PHR also is working to work on.
Another student asked about how it's hard to be, to jump into full-time advocacy when you're in medical school debt. I don't have like a broad answer for this, but I can tell you what I've done, which isn't easy, but I think it leads me to be a very happy person and a very happy physician. But I worked for 5 years just as a full-time ER doc. And at that time, I was able to pay off a lot of my debt, but also continue to have debt. But also it wasn't as fully satisfying to me to do that. So I actually, Susanna knows this because she was one of the first people I emailed to see what I could do at PHR. But then when I moved out to California from New York, I worked, I still work part-time in the emergency room, which helps me pay the bills in this incredibly expensive city, but also, and then gives me the freedom to do human rights work that sometimes doesn't pay as well. And so I don't think, I actually think it's like a double benefit, because staying in the clinical world gives you like a great life in terms of your finances, but also because it also gives you a lot of legitimacy and credibility to speak honestly about being a physician and doing human rights work. So I think you can be advocates outside in this active PHR and human rights world. There's also opportunities to work within your hospitals and do small things every single day in every single place. So I do projects both outside, and then I also do often projects inside. So right now I work at Kaiser, where we don't even recycle most of the bottles, cans, and paper, and climate change is one of those things I care about. So we have a big campaign going to try to get Kaiser to be more climate friendly. We also work on human rights issues inside the hospital. We survey people in there. PHR just is writing a report about protecting health workers, or is writing many reports about protecting health workers during COVID. And those are things you can do while being clinical. So I think as long as you're creative and just willing to think outside like the traditional box and work hard, it's very, very possible. And there's lots of folks doing it in all different ways.
Holly Atkinson, I was wondering if you might just share briefly your thoughts on this, having been a chair of PHR and knowing so many doctors over the decades who have managed to be very successful doctors and also troublemakers, as I saw someone put in the chat, good trouble. I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just curious if you would have some advice too.
Yes, thank you, Susanna. Well, Rohini, first I want to say thank you for your work in this area. As I'm watching the videos and listening to you speak, it reminds me of the investigation I did in Bahrain in 2013 when the Arab Spring uprising occurred and medics were out in the Pearl Roundabout doing the same thing. And I think, Susanna, if you and I were to go back to those times, we would never, ever anticipate that within 7 short years that we would see very, very similar behavior in the United States by security forces here. So it's, I'm sort of sitting here having flashbacks and, really reflecting on all of this. Before I answer that question, Susanna, I'll come back to it, but Rohini, I have a quick question. Is there any indication that there's anything being used in the tear gas besides CS? Because we've seen that in other parts of the world where, in fact, we had suspicions. I don't think we ever clearly documented it, but we had suspicions in Bahrain that actually the government was using canisters that had agents in it other than just CS. And I'm wondering if there's been anything here on the ground in that regard.
No, we tried to dive into that. Thankfully, most of the stuff that's being used in the US is produced in the US and is a bit better controlled in terms of that. So I haven't seen anything other than that. I have seen the use of more things like pepper balls where there's CS inside a bullet or paintball essentially, which complicates the whole matter.
Thank you. But Susanna, back to your question. I think the answer is, there is a time for everything. There is a season. The song is going through my head, which is, it's not all or nothing. There are going to be moments where you can only do little things, take small steps, as you've been talking about, when you are all medical students and your primary responsibilities are to learn and to finish your curricula and pass your boards. Indeed, you can't make this kind of work central or the primary work you're doing, but you can do little things that keep you connected and feeling that you are part of a deep network of people who care about these issues, and therefore you don't get isolated. So you can just do little things. And we've had many, many people here today make suggestions. I mean, just tweeting things out. I mean, it's just amazing we have the power today of social media. So just being able to take, a couple of minutes a week and to tweet out various information. If all medical students in the country did that every single week, the power of that across the United States would be enormous. So you can do little things, and then there will be times in your life, and you will have long lives statistically. I mean, what's amazing is that, a young person born today, is going to live to be 90 or 100. And we have to reinvent ourselves. And as you go through life, you will you know, you may go back for more training. You may have a job that's inside of academia. You may have a job that's with an NGO. So, you know, I think there's going to be points where you'll have the opportunity to get engaged more. And I think it is, I understand how frustrating it is to want to go out there and make a difference, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can engage in very small ways, which ultimately will make very big differences in the world. So go gentle on yourself in terms of, you know, not being able to fix it. I mean, it's back to what AJ said this morning, Alan Jones, one of my favorite quotes in the Torah is, you know, don't be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. You know, you're not required to complete the task, but you are not free to abandon it.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. This was an amazing conversation. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up soon. So we have to finish by 5:30. So I just want to extend the opportunity for everybody to just say some concluding remarks. It's amazing to see not the entire PHR team, but a lot of you here. And this was such an incredible conversation.
Thanks, Sebastian. Yeah, I mean, I just want to, I think that was a great place to sort of end on, in that I think really there's always a big range of things that you can do to try to have an impact and to try to make a difference and to try to you know, contribute in large and small ways to the broad effort that we're all trying to be a part of for change and for advocacy around human rights issues. And so, you know, whether it's tweeting or, you know, social media posts or, you know, signing up for action alerts or calling your representatives, all the way up to like joining a protest, or, you know, when we're all able to again, like come to Washington and, you know, and you know, show up in person or go to a city council meeting. You know, it doesn't always need to be that big either. But I think that there's a great range of things that you can do to make a difference, and PHR is always going to be a very happy partner to have with you in trying to make that change.
I would just say I'm so happy that there's so many people who have sat through a Saturday's conference, and it just really gives me hope. And it just makes me so happy to hear that all of you care about human rights and are in healthcare already. And thank you.
I just want to say again, thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Sebastian, for your remarkable leadership. We feel so blessed to have you at the CUNY School of Medicine, and you've done a fabulous job with everybody else on the team putting together this conference today. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Atkinson. I mean, this truly would not have been possible without your help. And of course, everybody here at PHR, you know, Sebastian and I are very grateful to have you here with us today. And to all of our attendees, thank you so much for not only showing up, but staying with us through the day. We know it was a long conference, but thank you for being here, for the speakers, for engaging during the workshops, for giving us your thoughtful contributions. And, you know, I really feel that it made a difference. And lastly, before everyone leaves and before I give Sebastian a chance to say something else, I'll just leave off with that we did record the sessions today. And as soon as we end this meeting, we will immediately start to process those, and those should be uploaded to the Student Advisory Board website shortly. So thank you again for coming, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for supporting us here at the CUNY School of Medicine as well.
Yeah, I think Jackie pretty much covered it, and I don't have much more to say. Just thank you, Dr. Atkinson. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Dr. Haar, Michael, Kevin, and there's too many people. There's like over 20 people that spoke today, and I wish I could list everybody. And our entire CUNY PHR team, the entire PHR Student Advisory Board, you guys have all been incredible. And we're so thankful for you. And this today was a success, and yesterday was a success. This our first ever virtual PHR conference was successful, and now we go forward, and hopefully next year will not be virtual. Yeah. And thank you, Dean Macbeth, as well. Forgot to mention that.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you with us, Dean Macbeth.
Susanna, maybe you want to say like one more thing before we all head out.
I've said a lot, but yes, very happy, as Rohini said, to just see this incredible engagement. I don't know how, I said this to Sebastian earlier, how you medical students put on a conference like this literally entirely by yourselves while you're doing your studies. It's truly remarkable and speaks to the hope that we all have for the future of dealing with the many challenges we discussed. But really, really don't be hard on yourselves. It is one step at a time. Each of us takes baby steps. Together we create a giant step. So hang in there, stay strong, stay well, stay safe, and stay in touch.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekends.
Stay safe, stay healthy. Hope to see you at future PHR events.
Yep.
Please send us an email if there's anything that you want us to do or anything you want us to advocate for. We're here for you.